Burke.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality. I am Megan Bonner, and joining me as always is Christy Powell.
Howdy.
And today we have a guest who
looks a little bit like a ghost currently.
Right. Julie Burke, who is specializes in autism spectrum disorder, and she is running a little late. So once she gets here, we'll pull her in and we'll get into the meat of the day. But for the moment, we have Community Corkboard.
What's going on?
We have our magazine, of course, formerly newsletter, now magazine. We have it translated into English and German, and we need help. We need volunteers to help translate it into other languages, especially Spanish.
So our Spanish and German speakers in particular, if you could shoot us an email. But also, if you haven't checked out the newsletter, it's pretty great. We have it in magazine form, but you can also download it online. It's worth taking some time with.
In the digital version, the links, you can literally click through it and like the links work and like watch.
It's all hyperlinked.
Yeah, and watch the videos and everything. It's amazing. Also, if we do not see you again, Happy New Year! Let's see here. You can reach out to us via email at sex@atheist-community.org. If you have any questions or just want to reach out and tell us how much you love us, we always like hearing it.
We do. We've got some great emails recently, and so we'd love to continue to hear from you.
Yes. You can also support us at patreon.com/secularsexuality. And finally, if you are interested in joining the conversation and you'd like to call in, the number to call is 512-686-0279. Now, that should be appearing at some point on your screen, but if not, that again is 512-686-0279. Now, Christy, since we do not have our expert here today,
Sure.
or at least yet, would you like to just go over preliminary of what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, we really just wanted to spend some time talking about the experiences of dating, the experiences of sex and sexuality, and also religion when it comes to folks who are living on the autism spectrum disorder. We can get more into the nuts and bolts of what that really means, but it covers a wide range of neurological concerns that affects people's day-to-day lives in a whole bunch of different ways. And a huge part of that is people's ability to connect emotionally, romantically, sexually, and spiritually. And so I wanted to spend some time talking about, just the different ways to overcome that, the different things to look for, and ways to understand and communicate with one another. And I have to say, I was a little concerned when I pitched the idea for this episode that nobody was going to be excited about it, that it was going to be, a niche audience, or that, folks around the studio wouldn't necessarily see the importance of it. But I have been really amazed at how excited everybody has been to get to this topic and to get to these issues. You in particular felt a real personal connection to this story.
I did, and I do. Having 3 siblings myself, and 2 of them being on the autism spectrum at differing points along that spectrum, it is definitely an important subject to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's also, I think, a large portion of the population that when we're talking about sex and sexuality and relationships and just interaction in general, that oftentimes gets left out of the conversation, but it is a huge part of the populace.
Yeah, absolutely. And we forget to include them at all, oftentimes. And then also, folks on the spectrum tend to be really infantilized. We see them as children that just didn't develop or that got stunted at a certain point, and that's not their reality. They're not children.
Not at all.
An adult with autism is an adult. Maybe they have a different view on the world than what's neurotypical, but they still have fully functional sexual lives and exist as sexual beings, and it's important to address that in a very different way than you would with a 12-year-old.
Right, and I think it's important to also remember that someone with autism isn't necessarily emotionally stunted. They have certainly more, what's the best way to put it? More barriers to communication.
Yeah, there's some obstacles there, but
definitely doesn't
that
mean that they are necessarily emotionally stunted in any way, shape, or form. And I think we've made huge strides, and by we, a royal we, of course, we have made huge strides in the last even 10 years in communication, learning better ways to communicate with people who are further on the autism spectrum, who are nonverbal. It's not that they can't communicate, it's that we had not found the proper means yet.
Yeah.
And so, learning all of these different things is very, it gives hope. I think.
and having these new avenues to communication was a thing that drew me to this topic, is honestly a thing that drew me to counseling and the field of psychology in general. I had the privilege to see Temple Grandin speak a couple of years ago. She's actually coming back to Austin, for those of you who are local and interested. But she is an
I'll have
activist
to hit you up for
and a
deets
speaker.
on that.
Yeah, it's at the Stateside Theater. It may be close to sold out, but certainly worth it. I find her in particular to be a really remarkable speaker and activist, and more than anything, her work has focused on a lot of what you're saying, the reality that these are people with rich inner lives that maybe have some obstacles to communication, or maybe in another sense just have a different form of communication that the rest of the world doesn't necessarily share. And so there's a lot of bridging the gap there, not just changing them or bringing them to some different level, but actually recognizing that these are fully functional people that communicate in a way that is maybe outside of the norm or what's typical.
Right.
But is still fully valid in its own right. So I'm excited about that, and it's one of the reasons I'm really drawn to this field and to this topic.
Well, in that case, do you want to get started with, I heard you had an email.
Yeah, so I did want to take some time. We've been, as we said, getting some really great emails lately. We'd love to keep the conversation going even when the show's over. So please feel free to write in, sex@atheist-community.com. Org. Apologies. But yeah, this was one I wanted to spend a little bit of time with before we jump into calls. It reads, "Hello. This last year, my child has spoken to me about not wanting the male body and instead feeling like a girl. I personally fully accept my child and wish my child to live authentically, and am fully behind that. My husband is from Jamaica and unfortunately carries that masculine, no child of mine attitude and talks about shame, even calling my child a freak or a clown. I'm aware of how damaging that can be to my child. My child has been referred to a gender development service, and a child adolescent mental health service is involved. I also take my child to gendered intelligence, and my child has met with other children with similar concerns and youth workers who are transgender themselves." So it definitely sounds like she's doing everything
She's taking
can.
the steps.
Yeah. But the concern comes here. My child's extended family, my mother, my brother, my sister-in-law, my child's cousin are Bible-believing dogmatic Christians. My child values relationships with extended family. They're not rude like my husband, but are disapproving of me. I'm under a lot of pressure to correct my child from husband and from extended family. My family say things like they feel sad about this and that I am guiding my child wrong. They believe the Bible is literally true. This has caused a big difference affecting the quality of my relationship with my family. And then this is the part that kind of started to break my heart a little bit. My child is having to be gender neutral much of the time. One key reason being my husband's bad reactions. He does things like saying he'll take my child to get a haircut. He has done this once, but at least allowed my child to keep some length rather than close cut all around. My child is now 10 years old. I allow my child to be fully girly. However, this is toned down a lot when my husband is around. Before he comes home from work, my child might need to change out of clothes or take hairbands out. We hide some of these clothes. I don't know if you have any advice on trying to get better support for my husband, for my child, or talking to my strongly religious family. Is there a way to argue in the context of the Bible? What might help to change my husband's viewpoint?
Wow. So that is pretty powerful.
It's a lot to take on.
It is a lot. And something that concerns me a little in this particular situation is that most people who are originally anti-LGBT come around to the idea because someone close to them in their lives, a child, a brother, a sister, etc., comes out. In this case, it's a father and a daughter, let's be clear, and who is refusing to accept that reality. I worry that having a child with that, if you're not going to come around to having a child, then I worry
Maybe
for that.
Stuck.
Yeah. I worry that that person might be permanently stuck in their line of thinking. That's not to say that they're, that they are permanently stuck or that they can't be dissuaded. With that dynamic, that worries me.
Yeah, my fear, my concern is very similar. That idea that, this is somebody who is being faced with their own child, that they clearly love, and is just not having it. And I wonder if there was some way to convince him that this is not a phase, that this is not, gender can be very fluid, but that this is not something that's just not happening, or that you can beat out of somebody, or that you can force into a change. And I worry about sort of the code switching, the idea of this young girl having to be two different people, even in her own home.
Right. In the home where that should be her one refuge. And especially at that age, that is such a formative age to have one parent telling you, yes, this is fine. Yes, be yourself. And then on the other hand, having the other parent, having to hide that from your other parent.
Sure.
I think that it could also be from the father coming from a place of loss, a feeling of loss, of losing a son.
Sure.
I don't know if this couple have any other children, but if this is their only child, I certainly can see where a feeling of loss, a feeling of bewilderment, especially if they are, as the emailer said, religious, or coming from a place of deep religious background, then of course that's just not right.
Yeah, so one of the questions was how to argue in the context of the Bible. And I always feel like that's kind of a slippery slope. I mean, definitely there's value in being able to meet people where they're at, being able to hear their own arguments, and frankly, to a certain extent, use the Bible, use their religious practice by bringing that up in the argument and pointing out that, you say you believe this, but the book actually says that, and, sussing through some of that. I don't know that there's a lot of value, though, in, quoting scripture at somebody and trying to out-argue them in that way.
Right, because you're using flawed material to fight flawed material to fight flawed material.
Well, and if internal consistency was a deal breaker,
then it wouldn't be an issue
the deal
in the
would have
first
been
place.
broken. Yeah.
Yeah. I personally don't have a whole lot apart from just pure sympathy, to some extent, empathy for this family and for this little girl. But I don't really have a whole lot of advice for how to change someone's mind.
Sure.
That is not an easy task. And really, as I am a firm believer in therapy, as I am constantly told, you cannot change others, you can only change yourself. So I think the best thing you can do, unless you're concerned about some sort of violent reaction, which is a whole nother issue unto itself.
But one that's, very possibly in play.
Right. I would say if violence is not a factor, or the possibility of violence is not a factor, let your daughter be herself in front of dad. And show dad that he's not losing a son, he's gaining a daughter. And that daughter is wonderful and beautiful in her own way.
Yeah, and I mean, my heart breaks to just think about how tricky figuring a gender out is for anybody at that age.
Oh, goodness gracious.
I mean, even if you are a cisgendered woman, are you the type of woman who wants to start wearing makeup in your early teens? Are you more of the stereotypical tomboy? Like, what do you want to be, and how do you figure those things out can be really tricky for anybody as they're forming their own identity and getting permission to experiment and try different things and be different people. So, yeah, I definitely hear that.
Yeah. So I think wrapping this particular email up, there's no simple, easy answer to this situation. And if violence is a possible reaction in this situation, I think maybe some other additional steps might need to be taken to protect your daughter.
Absolutely. And yeah, I am not going to, off of a couple of paragraphs, try and prescribe a life-changing piece of advice, but it definitely makes me wonder, whether these relationships should be continued. Does dad still need to be around? Is that something that needs to be really looked at? Family therapy, relationship therapy, individual therapy, all of those things seem really vital because this is an uncomfortable and sticky situation.
I think ongoing help from local professionals local to you would be your best bet. So with that, would you like to move on to calls? We have a couple.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And of course, we still have lines open, 512-686-0279. Also, remember to hit that like and subscribe button. We have, let's see here, several viewers and only 9 upvotes. So let's see if we can't get that a little higher.
Well, fair enough. Yeah. Let's jump into a couple of calls while we're waiting on our guest.
Did you have a particular number you wanted to go with?
I feel like Aaron's been waiting for a while. I'd love to take that off.
Aaron, you are on the air. Aaron?
We may place you on hold and come back here in just a few minutes if we can.
Yep. All right. So next one up would be, let's see here. Do you want to go with Julie?
Yeah, let's do that.
Julie, you are on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, great to be here.
Oh, well, we are very happy to have you here. What do you want to talk to us about today?
Yeah, I myself am on the spectrum, and I would like to talk about growing up in the 90s as neurologically and sexually atypical. And by that I mean in the 90s, there was no term, like the term autism meant those people who don't talk. And so there were certainly never things like Asperger's or autism spectrum. So I was just that weird kid. So on top of being, that weird kid with no friends who got bullied all the time, I was that kid that didn't want to date. Now, I identify as demisexual, and had I known at least the term asexual in the 90s, it would have saved me a lot of headache, because back then, there's the false dichotomy that if you're not heterosexual, well, of course you could be heterosexual and demisexual, but if you're not interested in dating boys, it must mean that you're in the closet. My mother thought that I was in the closet, and I am fortunate in that I grew up in a secular Jewish household, which meant we went to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we ate, pepperoni pizza and things like that. So it wouldn't have been an issue. But the thing is, the only reason it even occurred to me to think that I might be gay is because people were putting it in my head. The kids at school. Oh, she doesn't like boys. She must like girls. And in the early 90s or mid 90s, if you weren't in like New York City or San Francisco, or I don't know, maybe even there too, being thought of as gay, you might as well be saying I'm a leper.
Right.
So there was that, and what also was difficult was that my mother, in trying to figure things out, asked me these very invasive questions. Now, when you're a kid, you're not hearing, "Oh, my mother's concerned." You're hearing, "Why is she asking me all of these questions? Why does she want to know these things?" And so I can give you one example. Being on the spectrum, we tend to get obsessed with things. When I was in my early teens, I was obsessed with the actor Arkin, which I'll be amazed if you've even heard of him. But he was a
Little Miss Sunshine. I mean, a handful of great films.
Yeah. So in the early 90s, I was obsessed with him, but I didn't have a crush on him, though my mom was convinced I did. It was more like I saw him as a role model, and I wanted to grow up to be like him, because he seemed like this, very multifaceted, multi-talented guy. And I can remember one time we went out and rented movies back when that was a thing, and we brought home a couple Alan Arkin movies, and we're pulling into the garage, and my mother says, she's just joking around, she says, "Tonight we're going to watch a movie with Alan Arkin, sexy Alan Arkin." And then suddenly her tone totally changes from, she's just being silly to being dead serious. She goes, "Julie, what traits do you find attractive in boys?" And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "I don't know." And that was my honest answer. I didn't know. It just wasn't on my plate. I told my father this story years later. He said that I should have told my mother, "You have the subtlety of a hand grenade." But anyway, I didn't have my first crush until I was almost 15, and the number of people that I've been interested in, I can count on my fingers, and they've all been guys. But and I've only kissed one person. He knows who he is if he's listening, because he's the only one, and that was way back in 1999. And so that's kind of how I developed. But one thing that I also think is interesting that we should touch on, we all know that sex education in the United States sucks, but kids question it. They say, "Why are they telling us this? I know it's bullshit. I know that, they're whatever." But if you're a kid who's A, on the spectrum, and B, not having sex on their radar, there's going to be no reason to question it. And by it, I mean things like don't have sex because AIDS, and the way they would paint like I didn't have abstinence-only education at school, but it wasn't comprehensive either. Like, they didn't explicitly say don't have sex till you're married, that's bad, but the emphasis was like towards abstinence. And in fact,
it's still
I can
very
remember,
sex negative, even if it provides information. It's like, well, you probably shouldn't have sex. We don't recommend that you have sex, but I guess if you do, try not to screw it up.
Yeah, basically. And I can remember the middle school I went to, it was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and the high school was 10th, 11th, and 12th. When I was in 9th grade, they brought in three girls from the high school who were going to tell us why they were going to wait until they were married to have sex. And I remember this one girl saying, "It's a gift that I want to save for my husband." And this other girl showed us a picture of like a fetus, and she said, this is what the baby looked like that my friend aborted. And again, I didn't question it. I just kind of got this image in my mind painted of like, oh, people have sex before they're married, or like the equivalent of like these violent drug addicts. They're screwed up, they're messed up, they're gonna, and it was, and I know looking back that if I'd come to my parents about this, they would have said, no, this is absolutely ridiculous. You're getting these weird messages, but no kid wants to talk about sex with their parents.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable enough as it is. You have all these concerns and frustrations, and then to bring them up to your folks? Yeah.
Yeah, for reasons that are rooted in evolutionary psychology, the whole incest taboo. So the first time I got anything remotely comprehensive was when I went to summer camp. This was the summer of 1995. I was 14 years old, and we had a guy. His name is Scott Freed. He's HIV positive, and he's an activist. He's actually still alive, but back then HIV was, looking down the barrel of a gun.
Yeah.
And he told us, I'm not telling you guys to have sex. I'm not telling you not to have sex. If you have sex, have safe sex. And he talked to us about condoms and making sure that you have that discussion, like, have you been tested, and what did the test say, blah, blah, blah. And the first summer that he came, I thought, oh, my God, this guy is saying all these bad things. Then the following summer, when I was 15, he came again, and once again, I dismissed it in my mind as, oh, my God, he's saying all these bad things. But then something happened toward the end of the summer, and, God, it happened 22 years ago, but I still remember it like it happened last week. I was talking to some of my friends, and I was telling them about, like, how I learned what a blowjob was. And I say learned in scare quotes because when I was 11, I asked my mother what it was, and I kid you not, she told me it's when a woman kisses a man on his penis. Now, so of course, I'm just picturing somebody, pecking someone else on their penis. I'm not, like, imagining, someone sucking the guy off. So my friends all laughed, and I got really upset, and I got up and I stormed out, and they followed me. They said, we're sorry, we didn't know this would upset you. And I was furious that, like, I had been given this vague description, and I went to one of my counselors, just about all these different things that had been, that I've been thinking about. And I sat down with her, and she said, people don't wait till they're married. These schools, they feed you propaganda, blah, blah, blah. And I remember it was like this rude awakening. And I realized, like, it's kind of embarrassing looking back on it, but
that there was space to disagree with these things.
Yeah, and I remember thinking that the idea of having sex before you're married was like this radical fringe view. Like, that was what it was in my mind. And I realized just in that moment that I would have to change my views. And I was angry for a very long time about this. Like, I was angry for about, I'd say, a year and a half, 2 years, like, that the world had essentially lied to me. And around that time, there were these commercials, these TSAs. You can actually find them on YouTube. And the tagline was, "You're worth waiting for." And first of all, like I said, I grew up in a secular household. I didn't know what the Christian right was. I thought religion meant, oh, this is the holiday you celebrate, this is the temple you go to, and being religious is like, do we keep kosher, do we not keep kosher, that kind of thing. So I didn't know that these PSAs had a religious agenda behind them. And, like, there's one where it's called Sophomore Mom, and it's this girl, and she says, I met this guy, I didn't say no, I have a baby, and I'm 15. And then, like, she goes, talking about how difficult it is, and at the end she says, waiting for the sitter to show up just so you can go to class. You know who doesn't show up? The guy who said he'd love me forever. Yeah. I should have told him no.
That's what sex is, right? It's teenage pregnancy. Yeah. The two are directly connected. I wanted to take a moment just to first say, it sounds like an incredible experience. But how significantly different would it have been if words like Asperger's, or now as we have a more developed understanding of autism spectrum disorder, or words like demisexual or asexual, and hearing you say all of that, that is why we do shows like this and we use these labels and we, offer people these definitions. I so often hear, why do we have to put a label on everything? Can't people just be who they are and do what they want to do? And, of course we support that. People should be who they are and do what they want to do. But that, finding your tribe, having these descriptors, recognizing that there are a ton of different ways to be and that there are probably people like you and this is how to find them. I mean, that's the value of vocabulary.
Yeah, we use it to identify certain traits or certain things in ourselves or others to be able to, like you said, find that tribe, find the others like you.
And to recognize that the thing that you are, the thing that you're doing or wanting or being is
okay.
Yeah, and it's not unique to you. I mean, every individual is a unique individual, but that their experiences are shared by others. And
that's right. And it's, sorry, go on.
Well, the other question I really had for you was, how do you feel like your experiences as somebody who's not neurotypical affected your understanding of sex ed, of communication with your parents? I mean, what did those things look like, and what do you wish you had known then? Certainly, I mean, you were a child, but with regards to your autism, how did that factor into those experiences?
Well, the thing is, the way I see it, if you're on the spectrum and you're not having a lot of friends, you're not going to have like friends who are talking to you and saying, "Oh God, I can't believe that teacher said that." My cousin, she has sex and she uses condoms and they work and whatever. Like I didn't have anybody to have this conversation. Yeah, so I had absolutely no point of reference by which to question what I was hearing. Now, had sex been something on my radar, that is certainly something I would have questioned, because I was questioning all sorts of things that even my brother, who was an atheist practically from the moment of conception, did not question. Like gender roles. I remember coming, like sometimes my mom would say, again, she was trying to prevent me from getting picked on at school, but she'd say, "Julie, don't tell jokes. It's not ladylike." And I'd, kind of like scouting To Kill a Mockingbird between Anne Alexandra and Atticus, like night and day. I would go to my dad and I would say, and again, this is not me looking back in retrospect, I said stuff when I was 11 or 12. I'd say, "Dad, mom says because I don't have a penis, I shouldn't make jokes like this." Or it was just something very blunt. Like, I don't remember the exact words, but it was something to that effect. And I was thinking, I'm supposed to act a certain way because of parts that I have that I didn't ask to have or not have. That that makes no sense. And of course now, like, people are finally saying what I was saying like 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of the beauty of what I'm going to very loosely call the Temple Grandin model or ideal, that folks with autism are not healthy people that just had one broken piece, that this is instead a completely just healthy and reasonable way to be, and that it's vital to our society and to our culture and our genetic experience. I'm not a geneticist, but there is value in having that form of diversity, and you point that out when you're talking about, somebody who's willing to just see through all of the bullshit and ask questions very directly and succinctly and not be encumbered by all of the social barriers and the things that go with that.
And I also want to say that there's a reason that we are using the term non-neurotypical now, because it does not make you in any way less broken and, anything negative. It's just there is what we would consider typical, and then there is something other than that. But as we're finding, the autism spectrum covers a wide range, and there are more people on that spectrum than originally thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was just going to say what I will say about that is I, and actually a lot of other people I know, vehemently disagree with the whole, just taking out Asperger's from the DSM and putting autism spectrum disorder or whatever in the DSM, because it's so it's painting with broad strokes. Like, I mean, this is probably going to sound very politically incorrect, but I think it's true. I mean, when you're talking about someone on the spectrum who works and has a job and is verbal and in my case loves sarcasm versus somebody who's nonverbal is living in a group home. I mean, they may be on the same spectrum, but they are at two very different points on the continuum, and like to just compare them and say that, I mean, we're talking about two very different sets of circumstances to be addressed.
To clarify real quickly for everybody watching, the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual used by psychiatrists and other mental health professionals in order to ascribe a diagnosis went from its 4th edition to its 5th edition, and that officially kicked in just about 5 years ago. It's been a slow implementation. And in doing that, they moved from having Asperger's and autism as two separate diagnoses, and that was kind of it, to now having autism spectrum disorder, which covers a wide range of things, and like she's describing, it's an imperfect way of understanding and looking at it, but it also is meant to capture a greater number of people and to identify these people as being connected. And there is value in that as well. I remember when that change was first made, talking with professors and things, and they asked, are you comfortable with working from a spectrum point of view rather than like these discrete boxes? And, I just had to point out, I'm like going into the sex field. In sex, everything is
label.
on a spectrum or, is on this like broad range.
But I think along the spectrum, and to Julie's point, it may help some people to place labels along that spectrum to help mark, like mile markers of severity.
Yeah, and the DSM is put out by the American Psychiatric Association, I believe, and it is very political and very imperfect. It has a lot to do with insurance companies, with politicians, lobbyist groups. I mean,
we all know that the
medicine is not just medicine.
Yeah, transgender was only taken off as body dysphoria just in the last edition. So
yeah, I mean, homosexuality
was only taken.
Yeah, I was just going to say homosexuality is another fun example that was included in the 3rd edition and has been since taken out, but turns out not a mental disorder.
No, really? Say it ain't so.
Asexuality was only taken out in 2013. 2013. What I find real interesting is a lot of the same people who are able to understand, being gay or being transgender or whatever. It's like if you say I'm asexual or I'm demisexual or I'm not thinking about it or it's not on my radar or just anything along those lines, you might as well be saying I don't eat or I don't breathe oxygen. I mean, I just can't believe it's that difficult for people to wrap their heads around. I mean,
right. Well, did you have any particular questions for us today?
No, I just wanted to share my story because I think it's important that people hear it. And shout out to Matt Dillahunty. I was thrilled when he called in a couple weeks ago and said, yes, don't forget the asexual people.
Yes.
I also just want to say real briefly, I've heard you saying people with autism, and that's fine as long as that's what's coming out of your mouth naturally. But if you're looking to say what most of us like, most of us would rather hear autistic people. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't care. Again, I don't care what people use as long as it's what's naturally coming out of their mouths. What bothers me is when people say people with autism because they've been told by neurotypical parents and teachers that that's what they're supposed to say. They're like, oh, we can't be ableist. We have to say people with autism. And it's like, guess what? That's exactly what you're doing if you're listening, you're taking that advice from neurotypical people instead of those of us on the spectrum. And I've actually been told by neurotypical people, like, no, you have to do person first, like when they're knowing that I'm on the spectrum. It's like, no, actually, I don't.
Like, I can choose to identify how I want, and you can go shove it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I also like sarcasm, so...
Yeah. Oh, God.
Can confirm.
Yeah.
Well, Julie, thank you so much for your call. It was very insightful.
Thank you.
And we look forward to hearing from you again, hopefully.
Indeed. Keep up the show. It's a great show.
Hey, thanks so much.
All right. Well, a lot of stuff to unpack on that call.
Yeah, for sure. I worry sometimes when folks talk about their sexual identity, and in this case, a neurological identity, and these different aspects. And it's important to remember that people are multifaceted. Nobody is just gay. Right. Nobody is just asexual, and these different things all kind of come together. And
it's an aspect, but it's not the whole person.
Yeah, and there's this temptation, I think, to simplify and maybe to cluster, to blame the asexuality or the demisexuality on the autism or these other things, and that's really not beneficial to anybody. It's not seeing anybody.
It's not helping anyone.
It's not helping anybody, and so it's really valuable to have somebody like Julie call in and remind us of that.
All right, so just reminding everyone, we do have lines open, and the number is 512-686-0279. Also, if you go to the Atheist Experience webpage, there is a Call the Show button, and that will work as well. So I think, let's try Aaron again. Aaron, you are on the air.
Hey.
Hey, there you are.
Hey, what's on your mind today?
So this is actually the perfect day for me to call in because I have Asperger's. So,
okay.
Hopefully that'll add to it.
Yeah, thanks for checking in.
I wanted to talk about rejection because I actually asked one out for the first time ever yesterday, and I got a rejection.
Many more to come.
Yes,
but also sorry to hear it.
And I'll just preface with that happens to all of us.
Sure. What's actually kind of interesting is that I can give you pretty detailed accounts of what I was feeling both before, leading up to it, and after, because I had written them in messages to someone online. Would it be okay for me to read those?
Well, we want to keep it not. Is it a fairly short interaction?
I would say it's pretty short.
Okay, then yeah, sure.
Okay. The first one, I'm going to ask a guy out for the first time ever, and my emotions are just in flux right now. Happy at the possibility, scared of the rejection, worried about missing what seems like a great opportunity. I feel a lot more out of control than I'm used to, and it's a good thing, but it's anxiety driving. The guy I'm going to ask out just seems like a total package, and for the first time ever, I'm afraid that if I just let them go, I'll regret it. Before, I've always just admired crushes from afar. Maybe I did lose out on pursuing those, but I've never had this dread of that just happening without at least getting to actually fail. And admittedly, failure is one of the most difficult things I've ever had to deal with. But there's just so much that I like about them. Their improv-style humor, their intelligence, the way they treat their siblings. And let's just be honestly shallow. I think they're so hot and cute at the same time, which I love because they can basically be either of them.
No.
And a strange thing that I wouldn't have expected to have found intriguing is that our interests thus far don't have strong overlap, and we don't agree a ton. But it's not like hostile disagreement. I don't know quite what I wanted out of messaging you, but thanks for being here and being someone I can feel safe talking about with. And so that was the message, obviously before. And here's the one after, which is a lot shorter. So the stars aligned, and I had the chance to ask out my crush. I would have liked to have stayed more composed while speaking, but I can't blame myself for feeling nervous. I wasn't fumbling that badly. I'm proud of myself in the end. Feeling that, how do you describe it? Nervous charge when taking the plunge was interesting. Anyways, I was rejected. But I don't think I could have asked for a better one. They said no, gave me a hug, and told me they think of me more as a friend, which I'm still pretty okay with. It's better than wrestling with the uncertainty, and I'll be fine. I feel more happy than anything, which I'm kind of surprised about, obviously in a good way. They also gave me this red paper crown.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely sounds like a catch, but I think I would just say that not the total package, not a perfect human being, because they're human beings. And there are plenty of other great, wonderful people. And I know that that is so trite and almost feels like it's not worth saying. But I really want to, I suppose, emphasize the reality that this person that turned you down isn't perfect. Sounds like it wasn't meant to be as lovely as it may have been. And that there are plenty of other really lovely folks out there that would be super interested.
Yeah, I would just say, too, that your texts honestly sound a lot like the journalings of, I mean, anyone going through that type of situation. Mm-hmm. And if this was your first attempt, then I say kudos, you did very well.
Yeah,
most of us cannot say the same.
Yeah, it very much sounds like you're handling that in a pretty mature way, and that's great to hear. I always want to encourage people to do the ice cream and the TV binging and the sad thing that you need to do when you need to do it, for as long as you need to do it. I mean, it's nothing wrong after a big breakup or something like that to really indulge.
Or your first
for a minute.
Your first big rejection is definitely up there on that list. So
there's no need to rush to move past that to get to a happy place. It is okay to spend some time there. But, at a certain point when you're ready, and it sounds like you're moving pretty quickly towards that, getting up and getting back to the gym, sleeping 7-8 hours a night, eating 3 to 5 times a day. I mean, these basic things that we so often take for granted and even forget about are critical to getting through any sort of emotional turmoil.
Sure. I mean, and I feel like a little bit crestfallen today, but it's, when I think back to when it actually happened, I still end up feeling happy after it.
Yeah.
I think it's nice.
It's nice to be shot down when you know that you took a swing, when you know that you went to bat, that you put yourself out there, because there's nothing you can control. You can't change them, as Megan said, but you can control yourself. And it sounds like you handled this as well as anybody could ask you to. So that's the real takeaway for me, because if you keep doing that, if you keep dating in a way that is kind and compassionate, respectful of other people, and willing to put yourself out there, those habits are going to pay off in the end.
Well, that's reassuring to hear. And I was just kind of interested in hearing what your guys' experience was with rejection and kind of some of the lessons y'all have learned along the way.
Oh, boy. Okay, rejection. Well, it started in preschool.
Yeah.
And did not get any easier since then. But I would say some lessons learned are definitely, you're worth it. No matter what someone else may, despite any rejection you may receive, at the end of the day, you are still worth it. So it's worth trying again. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it's worth trying again, because at some point you are going to hit a home run and it will be spectacular.
Yeah, and I sincerely think that it gets easier each time to a certain extent. I mean, there might be moments where you feel so beaten down, you've been turned down, rejected so many times that you're not ready to get up and try again. And I think you should listen to yourself in those moments. However, I do think that when you stop looking at every potential crush, every person that you meet as a possibility and the only one for you in the relationship of a lifetime, and start to become comfortable with the idea that there are some 7-odd billion people on the planet, and you're going to get rejected by most of them if you were to try and ask them out, but there's still plenty of wonderful people that'd be very interested in you. So knowing that it's okay to get shot down, and if you ask 100 different people, you're likely to get more than a few yeses in there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that I'm kind of coping with it pretty well is that, ahead of time, I was very, I just kind of thought with myself, I need to be okay with being rejected. And, I kind of processed that first before going in.
Mm-hmm.
So once it actually did happen, even though, it's not what I wanted, I was more okay with it because I'd prepared myself mentally for it.
That's definitely something I do.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't, not just for relationships or, that kind of thing. For most things in life, I tell myself it's not happening until it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a sure thing, and don't be upset or sad when something doesn't happen because it wasn't already happening. So
yeah, taking stock of your life and realizing that missing out on this job, this date, this opportunity is okay because you still have a great life.
You haven't lost anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you're handling things really well. Get out there, get rejected more, and give us a call back if there's anything else we can help with.
I definitely will. It was nice talking to y'all.
Oh, you too.
Hey, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd say rejection is definitely a tricky one, and it hits us all in different ways at different times.
Yeah, part and parcel of life. And I think one really valuable thing we heard from Aaron that, I think is worth highlighting is just his respect for the person who shot him down.
Yes.
So often, and particularly I'm talking to guys here, frankly, just the way that we're raised in this particular culture, there's a major sense of entitlement, of being owed a debt, of a relationship or whatever else, whether that's sex or a second date or anything. And so recognizing that it is perfectly acceptable for somebody to not like you, or maybe like you, but just not be in like with you or want to fall in love or be in a place in their life or whatever it might look like.
Right. Yes. I would say for women, there's definitely the feeling of a lost opportunity.
Sure.
Because we are, of course, taught that every man is an opportunity, right, to have
Potential husband walking by.
Yes, exactly. It's a potential future. Every single one of them is a potential future. And that's so ingrained from an early age that the rejection, I think, for women sometimes is harder because it's not just a loss of this one opportunity. It's a loss of a lifetime of opportunities. All right, on to the next one, rejection. Okay, loss of a whole nother new range of opportunities. Go on to the next one. And so you're more, in a way, not just mourning your ego, but you're also mourning all the things that never happened, which is really sad, and it's horrible that is the idea that's impressed upon girls, but it's true.
Yeah, I hear that. And I think that, in the past few years, as I've been dating more, I've really learned the value of acknowledging that you're going to get rejected a lot. And if you just keep doing things the right way, it's going to pay off eventually. Now, I mean, granted, I do look like this. But, for people who aren't as lucky, who maybe have things like interesting personalities or the ability to communicate with women, we're all working with different tools.
Right. So did you want to move on to our next caller?
Yeah, we've got a few other folks.
All right. So we do have lines open. You do not want to hear us try and riff. Trust me, it would not go well. So if you'd like to give us a call, please, 512-686-0279. We would love to hear from you. And Adam, you are on the air.
Hey, how you guys doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Just calling on behalf of my brothers. My brother has Asperger's, and he hasn't really ever hit the dating scene, and he's been wanting to, and he also has social anxiety and as well as narcolepsy, or seizures, or epilepsy.
Epilepsy.
Sorry. Yeah, that was the word I was looking for. Sorry. So he was asking me, for advice on, how to approach this, and I said, well, I know you have issues going out in public, maybe online dating, but the last, just to show how long ago, I've only met one girl online, and that was in the age of MySpace. So I'm really not the guy to kind of give advice on if online dating is really an appropriate way for him to go about it. And if so, is there any kind of autistic or Asperger friendly like dating sites, or is there maybe a better way to go about this to ease him into the dating scene?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I have to say I am not myself aware of any particular dating sites that are geared towards that population. I'd love to see if anybody in the chat might be able to chime in with any particular resources. But that being said, I do think that online dating is probably a really great idea for a lot of reasons. One is just the simple reality that it's a little bit of a sandbox. And what I mean by that is you can sort of meet new people, try on different things, play around and have these different opportunities without it necessarily, directly tying to your real life. Now, to be clear, if you are a dick on a first date to somebody you met online, you're still a dick. But, it's an opportunity to meet people that you would never have otherwise crossed paths with and to go into it in the same way we were just talking with Aaron, knowing that it likely won't lead to a second date. I mean, I don't know what your success rate, Megan. I don't know what anybody else's success rate is, but usually when I go on a first date, I know that there's maybe a 20% chance that I'm ever going to see this person again.
Right.
Yeah.
Dipping a toe in, seeing how the water feels.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And,
so you... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just, I guess, kind of circling back to that point and really emphasizing the idea that one of the best ways to get good at dating is by dating. And going out on mediocre dates, going out on outright bad dates is still part of learning how to date. And so I think that having that little bit of practice of getting to meet different people, there is an opportunity to speak with people, before you meet them face to face, which may be more comfortable. I generally advise people not to get too far down that road. I know a lot of people have different tastes, and they like to message back and forth for weeks and months before they meet somebody face to face. That frightens me because I feel like people often build up expectations that aren't delivered upon when they actually meet somebody face to face. And maybe the person that they're meeting face to face is wonderful and that they could have a great relationship with, but it's not the person they thought they were meeting after building up all of these false conceptions.
Hopes and dreams.
Yeah, and I understand that, again, women in particular tend to feel more comfortable when they've gotten to know a guy a little bit better because there's a lot of not just violence, but just dickish behavior perpetrated by guys that they, say a couple of nice things in a chat, and women want to see if they can keep that up for a couple of weeks. And, I empathize with that. But yeah, I would say that online dating is a great place to start.
Okay.
Yeah, I would have to agree too. And when it comes to eventually, one would hope, actually meeting face to face, try, a public but a quiet public place where there's not too much distraction, not too much input coming in.
Yeah, that sensory overload.
The sensory overload,
sure.
yeah. Because you're going to be having enough anxiety and sensory input as it is without that overload sending you into an episode, I guess you could call it.
Sure. Well, let me ask you this, Megan. I mean, you and I are strangers. We meet on OkCupid. We're messaging back and forth. I say, let's meet up.
Did we? What? Huh?
Right?
Oh.
Yeah. It's canon now. It's on air. So I recommend, hey, let's go to this nice, quiet coffee shop that I like. And you turn back and say, no, I'd much rather go to this bar / bowling alley / it's also a disco and karaoke. And I'm like, how about a different coffee shop? At what point would you feel uncomfortable or comfortable, or how would it be best to communicate to you, hey, one of the reasons I'm not interested in going down to, 6th Street and downtown and Bright Lights Big City is because of my sensory experiences and these different things?
Honestly, just be upfront with it, because once you're upfront with it, it makes sense. You're suddenly no longer the creep who wants to go, to some back alley. You are someone who has sensory input issues and would like a quiet place to get to know me. So I would say be upfront.
Okay. So maybe not put it in your profile, but be comfortable talking honestly about those sorts of things?
Very much so. And don't hold it back until right before the date. Make it one of, not the first, don't lead with it, but definitely make it when you get into the pleasantries of, so tell me a little about yourself. I would definitely, sandwich it in there somewhere so that it is on the table.
Not necessarily awkward.
Exactly.
No.
And it also helps guide the interactions from there so that, one, you don't get some crazy, person who...
Catfish.
Exactly. You don't get catfished. You don't get someone who doesn't want that type of relationship. They're immediately gone. Okay, on to the next possibility that might actually be a good match.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think my last piece of advice, and I'd love for you to weigh in on this, would be to really help differentiate for him or help prepare him for the reality of that rejection. Knowing that online internet dating rejections aren't like real life rejections in the sense that no one is going to walk up to you at a coffee shop and randomly say, I don't like you. I don't want to date you. I don't think you're pretty. And so when we date online, when that happens, and it does, unsolicitedly, people we thought were into us just all of a sudden turn into jerks, or people that we weren't even connected to in any way just reach out to say, hey, just so you know, I don't like you. I dislike your face. And that
Christy, has
sucks.
this happened to you?
I mean, it was. I read a story. It was in a book.
Oh, okay.
I have many books in my apartment. Okay. Only to say that, maybe prepare him a little bit and help contextualize those things. To explain that dating online is not the same as meeting somebody in person. The social rules are a little bit different, and helping to just ease him into that. There are some really great books on the topic that may, depending on his interest level, be really useful. And so I would encourage you to take a look if that's something that would take some of the anxiety out.
Which books would you recommend?
Yeah, I personally loved and still love to recommend Modern Romance by Aziz Ansari. I know that's a tricky pick for some folks nowadays, and that is something we could spend a whole other episode on and have. But I think that that's particularly wonderful. I also really like Dataclysm, the author of which is escaping me.
I am not familiar with this, but I will say when it comes back to Christy, we can put them in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll definitely have that up.
Later you can look back and rewatch and go into the show notes and find those referenced there.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the advice, and I'll definitely pass it along to my brother. You guys have been pretty helpful.
Yeah, glad to hear it. And, like we said to Aaron, happy rejection, happy dating, and everything else to him. We wish him luck.
Tell him good luck from us.
Absolutely, absolutely. You guys have yourselves a very wonderful evening.
You too. Yeah, that's definitely a tricky area. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a tricky area for anyone.
Sure. I mean, dating in general, why are we here in an hour and a half every week talking about these issues? It's going to be difficult for anybody. But yeah, that does sound difficult. And I guess I kind of wanted to circle back a little bit to what you talked about, how to disclose these things. And it may seem a little bit like you are, burying the lead, or that you're ashamed, or these different things. And I guess I don't think that that's how you feel, but I just wanted to kind of clarify.
Right.
Because in that same way, I'm polyamorous, and when I date somebody, that's something that they really ought to know.
Right.
Because if things start going well and 5 dates in, it's like, oh, hey, by the way.
Here's my other girlfriend.
Yeah, that's going to be an uncomfortable conversation for somebody who wasn't prepared for it. Now, should we live in a society where everybody assumes that everybody else is neurotypical, or that everybody else is monogamous, or these different things? No, I don't think that we should. I don't think that that's the best version of our culture that's available to us.
But unfortunately, it's kind of generally the norm.
It is definitely the norm. And so, I do have, depending on what dating site we're talking about or whatever, I do generally identify openly as polyamorous in those places. But I also, depending on how I meet somebody, I might not lead with that, hi, I like to have sex with lots of different people. It's not like that. But I do try, after we're messaging a little bit, maybe before we start making concrete plans to get together.
Exactly.
To just say, this is who I am.
After the pleasantries.
Yeah.
But before, before the even thinking about a first date. Just, hey, you get into that on anyone who's been on online dating and has had those conversations, it's always inevitably, so tell me a little bit about yourself. And that is the perfect opportunity. You can list, your interests, hobbies. By the way, I'm on the spectrum. And because it should not be a big deal, but it is an integral part of who you are.
It's a form of self-description.
So
and
it
that's
is
how you describe yourself.
Exactly. And so when someone says, tell me a little about yourself, all right, I will. I'll tell you, that I'm on the spectrum, that I had oatmeal for breakfast, that, I like dogs more than cats. Don't send me any emails, thank you. Although I still think the micro pig is the best.
The best mascot?
The best mascot.
Yeah. It's fair.
Shout out to Serafina. Yes, the piglet is the best. And I think making that a natural part of the conversation, you don't want to lead with it and you don't want to hold it back. Just make it a natural part of the conversation. And if you make it a natural part of the conversation, then it's just a natural conversation.
Right. It just feels like part of the whole thing.
Right.
And not this
big
gridlock stopping moment.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Well, fair enough. It seems like we are going to be on our own tonight.
It does appear
sorry
that way.
to say. So, there were a few things that we wanted to talk about, and I'm wondering, how comfortable you would feel kind of diving in a little bit more as we were talking about autism spectrum disorder and these different things.
Yeah, sure. Just shoot.
Yeah, so I guess to wrap it, to go back on all of it, what does autism spectrum disorder look like in somebody's lives? I mean, Julie, one of those first callers, talked about, how there are real differences between people who are nonverbal and people who are, living largely independent and functional lives. And, there's a whole range of folks. So I know that when we're talking about these descriptions, they're imperfect.
Well, and I think the key word to use is spectrum, because it is a amalgamation, I think is the best word, of so many different characteristics and sensory type I don't want to say issues, but sensory type reactions that go into it. Now, I can only say from my own experience, because I am not a professional by any means, but I have had some little bit of interaction with people on the spectrum, that it can be anything from not in social situations, not making eye contact, not speaking. If you do speak, maybe you're monosyllabic, meaning saying yes, no, maybe. That's not even. But I know. Let me step back and say my personal experience with people on the autism spectrum.
Sure.
I have 3 siblings, and 2 of them are on the spectrum. They're at different points on the spectrum. One is my sister, and one is a brother. And it is also very different for males versus females in our society and autism. Very different, because a lot of times when females are at an early age have those kind of antisocial, I don't want to say totally antisocial, but what would be seen as antisocial behaviors, that is not what a lady should be.
Right, not what is expected.
And so there is a lot of time and effort put into making them comfortable in society and talking to people. And so to a certain point on the spectrum, women are kind of pushed more toward being more socially conscious.
So often folks who are on the spectrum are so aggressively socialized at an early age that it maybe wouldn't be diagnosed or noticed.
Right. But there, of course, are other symptoms that I know I have witnessed, not just from my siblings, but from other people on the spectrum, is coming into contact with situations where something doesn't make sense. And since there's no taking a moment to kind of do a reboot, there's no stepping back and revisiting. It's a sudden, snap reaction of this doesn't make sense. This just doesn't make sense, and it's never going to make sense. Why doesn't it make sense? In addition, there's of course the social anxiety. There is, as Julie said, oftentimes people on the spectrum will have some might call an obsession. A particular person, place, thing, genre, topic type thing. I know my little brother, when he was, probably around 10 years old, he was obsessed with Bionicles. Which were those toys that were like a cross between K'NEX, Legos, and some weird, I don't know, form, shape,
build your own
thing.
Action figure transformer
kind of,
thing.
Like Transformer, yeah. Another thing that could show up is, I apologize, I just had it in my head and then thought of Bionicles. There's a lot going on in there. And so there are a lot of other pieces and parts that I personally never have been
witness
to, exactly. Yeah, exposed to. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. So it is a wide range, but that's my experience.
Yeah, I worked very briefly in a respite facility for folks who are IDD or on the spectrum. So these were adults who had significant impairments and that were in a bit of crisis. They would come into respite as a chance to get out of the home, get out of whatever situation they were in, have just a place to catch up on sleep, to be supervised, and to kind of level off a little bit. And I want to be clear not to conflate, IDD and intellectual developmental disabilities with autism spectrum disorder, but there were a lot of folks that I would work with that would have just remarkably fascinating challenges in the sense that they would have the same reactions and wants and needs as everybody else, but would be coming at it from a completely different direction. And so, there were often conversations about appropriate and inappropriate and, when clothing should be worn and are these things that you should be looking at on the computer in the public library and all of these different complications. But it was far removed from the types of folks that we've been able to speak with tonight and the types of experiences that they're having. So it is really difficult, and I see Julie's point about combining all of those people into one spectrum.
Into one category.
Right.
And it's more a series of categories, series of labels, So it looks like we got another caller, and I think I might actually know who this is. Becca, you are on the air.
Hi.
Hey. For anyone listening out there, this is my sister. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for calling.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you want to talk about?
Maybe just some of the difficulties that I, as someone on the spectrum, have had. Just with sexuality in general and dating. I definitely identified with the caller earlier who was saying that, well, when you're young and you don't understand what's going on and you're not particularly interested in boys, so you must be gay, right?
Right, it's the only reason.
It's the only alternative.
When, maybe it's just that there's, I am a heterosexual female, but at 14 years old, with so many other things going on, 14, 15, 16 years old, and not experiencing what I thought my peers were experiencing in terms of attraction to the opposite sex. I legitimately thought for a while that I must be a lesbian. I wasn't really attracted to women either. I just, I think it's difficult because there are a lot of other things going on which can influence that. And you're also talking about, the part of the conversation in dating where they say, tell me something, tell me a little bit about yourself. Do you have any idea how hard that question is?
Very.
And I've been asked that question for college interviews and job interviews. And it's very difficult, especially, I can't speak for anyone else, but for me, because for the most part, when I am thinking about things, I'm thinking about things outside of myself. And so it's very hard for me to put anything that is internal into words. So I can't describe me. So having that dating conversation is even more difficult.
Yeah, do you find yourself kind of giving rote answers, things that you've said before and just sort of pulling them out because you feel like you're expected to? Or do you feel like at a certain point you're able to really relate to that question? No, it still feels kind of fake in a way?
I would say that 95% of my interactions with other people feel fake because it is me acting in a way to suit society's expectations. It's part of the reason that I was interested in my husband. I am married. I have a young daughter. And
absolutely adorable, by the way, if anyone is wondering.
Yes, thank you. I believe that she is the most amazing thing in the world, and I'm not biased at all.
Nope.
But part of I think what attracted me to my husband the most was that almost immediately after meeting him, I was able to not have to fake it.
Mm-hmm.
That in and of itself, don't get me wrong, he does not always understand what I'm trying to say, but he's okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a really important aspect of any relationship for someone on the spectrum or not, but especially on the spectrum, because we have such a hard time, I guess, acting in a way that is deemed like socially acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, I think that you raise a really interesting point about, we spend a lot of time talking about how to finesse these things, how to communicate well, how to date in a way that's appealing to others and, lure people in. But it is terribly important not to lure anybody in who's not going to be interested in the real you, because that is going to come out eventually. So being comfortable being yourself, being genuine in that way, and finding somebody who enjoys that about you.
And I don't have a whole lot of color commentary on this one because I kind of know your life story, so I feel like I have insider knowledge that is probably coloring my thoughts of questions. I'm like, no, I already know the answer to that.
Ask it anyway. I'm really bad. I'll answer just about any question, which people look at me weird, so...
No, I know. I've gotten that look from you before when I've asked questions. But socially, as a female on the autism spectrum, how did you feel you may have been treated differently than your male counterparts growing up?
I think that's probably the same way that most females are treated differently than males as they're growing up. Only in my case, it may have, I may have experienced it in a more extreme way, because a lot of I know I've heard autism referred to as like extreme male brain. So a lot of the
I don't buy that, but that's
differences.
That's mostly because I know you.
Like growing up, a lot of times I would be told that I thought and acted like a boy. Mm-hmm. I was straightforward. I don't know if
Yeah, because guys are mostly just allowed to be themselves. They don't have to make everything flowery and convenient for the listener.
You were bold. You were open. You were forward.
I loved math and science because it had rules.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo.
And I think that if I were, I don't know, the expectations may have been different or less significant had I been born male. Mm-hmm. Is that answering the question that you asked?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and walking away, I guess my last question for you would just be, what advice do you have for anybody out there who is, a parent of somebody who may be displaying signs of autism and is concerned about how best to offer support, or for anybody who is just now kind of coming awake sexually and wanting to have these sexual and romantic experiences? What tips would you recommend? What books would you send them to, or movies to watch? How would you help guide them through that process?
For parents to think their children may be displaying signs of autism, I would say just talk to your child's pediatrician.
Mm-hmm.
The pediatrician probably knows someone who can do screening or more in-depth screening than the pediatrician themselves can do. Mm-hmm. And sexuality, that's a toughie because it's so individual to the person.
Sure.
And society, I was lucky growing up that my mother would always, say that she didn't care about, sexual orientation or anything like that. She just wanted us to be who we were. Mm-hmm. But even with that, it was still very hard to figure things out for myself. And, like I said, I can't speak for anyone else. I think that's a universal coming of age sort of thing. But really just telling people to be okay with who they are and not being afraid to look deeper into themselves to try and figure out who they are if they're not sure. Mm-hmm. Because there's no bad that can come of that.
Well, thank you so much for calling.
Yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's beautiful advice for anybody, but I do really appreciate you touching base with us and sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I will talk to you later outside of this recording studio.
Okay. Your niece is very upset that she couldn't call.
Oh.
Well, tell her Auntie Meg will call later.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Alrighty, so do you have any closing comments or thoughts?
Yeah, only to say that it's heartening to me that we've had so many folks call in
Yes.
who have been, directly affected by these types of concerns. Mm-hmm. And to, I guess, recognize that there are so many people that are having these experiences and that anybody who's watching is certainly not alone. Mm-hmm. And that the corollary of that is anybody who's watching who maybe doesn't know anybody who's on the spectrum or who just sort of goes through their life assuming that everybody is neurotypical.
Right.
It's important to remember that there are people with differing experiences and to make space for that and to not demonize it.
Yeah, that I will say my parting comments would be for people who, and this, we can talk all day about people who don't vaccinate their children. But to me, the idea of someone thinking that the possibility of their child having autism is worse than the idea of their child dying of polio. Mm-hmm. Just how it's almost like it's a death sentence in its own right, and it's not. And it's like there's something wrong with people who are autistic, but there's not. It is just another point on the spectrum that is the human condition.
Mm-hmm. I think that's terribly well said, that we are, casting a light on these particular concerns in large part because our society has done very little to, and to make accommodations and to have an expansive opportunity for different types of people. See also anybody who's LGBTQ, mm-hmm. see also anybody who isn't upper middle class white,
right.
So we do, spend this time and have these conversations, but we're really not talking about anything that is broken or wrong.
Yeah, just out of what we, society, consider the norm. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we can continue to broaden that scope to include more and more and more variety.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you to everybody who hung with us and for calling in and writing. We, of course, love to get your emails, so please keep them coming. Don't forget about the newsletter.
Yes, the formerly newsletter, now magazine. We do need help translating into other languages, so please, if you know a foreign, I can't speak even English right now. If you know a foreign language and are fluent in it, please send an email over to us. And
I don't know that we're specifically looking for people who can translate into fictional languages, but it would be a childhood dream of mine come true if anybody was interested in taking my column and putting it in Klingon. Just throwing that out there. Dothraki also acceptable. No takers? Okay. All right.
So with that, would you like to take us out?
Yeah. As always, whether it's after an online date, whether it's in Klingon, whether it's typical.
Can you say it in Klingon?
I cannot. I will not. I shall not.
With a fish on a boat and a car and yeah.
Neither here nor there. We just want to encourage everybody to go out and give yourself a big ol' orgasm, or better yet, give someone else one.
Bye. Please say it.
Yeah, were our mics hot earlier when they weren't meant to be?